Let's record this. Today's Daf Yomi is Daf Chaf Zayin. It is Yevamos Daf Chaf Zayin, Yevamos 27. And today's Daf Yomi, I'm not going to say it's the most complicated daf in the world, but it is a little tricky, so we have to pay close attention. So the Talmud had been discussing the concept of what's called a chalitza pesula. That's a chalitza that's not that for some reason there was some aspect of it that made it less strong. And so in this context, the Gemara quotes a statement from Shmuel. Shmuel Amar Echad Choletz L'Kulan. So in a circumstance where there were three brothers, and these three brothers were married to, this was the case on the top of 26b, there were five brothers, and three sisters were married to three of the brothers, and the three brothers died, and they left behind two brothers and three sisters who were requiring chalitza. So then Shmuel says under those circumstances, echad choletz l'kulan. We had said yesterday that the position was that Rav says that each one of the brothers does chalitza with one of the sisters, and then the third one requires chalitza from both. But now Shmuel says one does chalitza with all of them, or presumably that's how we're going to read it. So the question is this: Shmuel requires that we need a great chalitza, meaning a good chalitza. We'll see what this means in a moment. What does that mean, a chalitza ma'aliyah, and how do we know Shmuel says it? But since Shmuel says that Shmuel requires a chalitza ma'aliyah, and how are we going to say one of the brothers does chalitza with all of them? And how do we know that this is what Shmuel says? The Amar Shmuel's taught on the top of 27a, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Shakol Ne'B'Dvaro. Here, in these daf and Rashi is just so fantastic, so amazing. So we're on the top of 27a, and the Talmud says, that if Shmuel did chalitza with two of the sisters, meaning to say that what's the circumstance here? Rashi, we'll read the Rashi, I'll just translate it, that there were two sisters that fell to him for Yibam, to one person from two brothers. And each of these sisters who fell to Yibam also has a co-wife. And so if he, under those circumstances, which Shmuel says, if he does chalitza with the sisters, then the co-wives are not exempt. Why? Because since if he wanted to, he could not have done yibum with their sisters because they are the achos zikuka, so they are the sister of somebody who he also has a zika with. So therefore, since he can't do yibum with them, their chalitza is not as effective, and so therefore he's not going to exempt the co-wives. So what he should do under those circumstances, he should do chalitza with the co-wives and thereby exempt the sisters. And even though Rashi says the co-wives also he wouldn't be able to do yibum with them, Rashi says still, nevertheless, the prohibition vis-a-vis the co-wives is less than the prohibition with the sisters, and so therefore their chalitza is going to be better than if he had done chalitza with the sisters, as the Gemara is going to explain. Rashi says. So therefore, we have this case where chalitza chayolos, where if he does chalitza with the sisters under those conditions, niftarut saros, he is not exempted the co-wives. Now, what's the circumstance? Hecha de kaima chalitza de Shimon chalitza kshera. So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, where the chalitza of Shimon is that Shimon, one of the brothers, has not yet done chalitza with any of the sisters. So therefore, Shimon's chalitza is okay. Then chalitza Reuven chalitza psua. So isn't that a circumstance where if Shimon's chalitza is still kosher and Reuven does the chalitza, it's going to be disqualified? So isn't that our case that we had previously, where we have the three sisters? And Shmuel said that one of the two remaining brothers should do chalitza with all the three sisters. But doesn't this contradict what Shmuel is saying here, that Shimon's chalitza is not going to be as effective as Reuven's? So the Gemara says no. When Shmuel says one does chalitza with all three of the brothers, what does that mean? Nami de kamar. No, it means nami de kamar am tzayis. It means that he does chalitza with the third one. It means that after the Reuben does chalitza with one, and Shimon does chalitza with the other one, then the brother comes back and he does it with the third one. Meaning to say that since let's look at Rashi says Komar Shlishis La'achar Shachalat Shimon Lashniya, after Shimon did chalitza with the second one, Shehi al Shnei and Achos Chalutza, that both of them are considered the third one is now for both of them the sister of his Chalutza, and so both of them are equivalent with her. And so therefore he says Shmuel's other position that since it's a Chalitza Psua, you don't need to go to all the brothers, just one is sufficient. So the Gemara says Va'kulin Kamar, but it says Va'kulin Kamar. Shmuel said one does Chalitza with all of them. Gemara says no, Kivan the Ruba Gabe, since he's done Chalitza with all of them, then Kivan the Ruba Gabe Karle Kulan. So therefore it's called all of them, it just means the majority. Or alternative answer is Ibayis Emaki Ka'amar Shmuel Chalitza Ma'aya Ba'inan. When Shmuel says we need the best Chalitza, and so therefore Shmuel says one does Chalitza with all of them, Hani Mili Lemifter Tzarasa. But that's only to exempt the co-wife. But Mifter Navshay Patra. So to exempt her co-wife, you need to have the best Chalitza done. But just to exempt the woman herself, then it's going to be any Chalitza is effective. And so therefore one could do Chalitza with all three, where none of them have any tsaras, where none of them have any co-wives. So now the Gemara is going to try to give us some other interesting cases. So let's say a man, what's the case here? Cholatz l'balas aget. So what's the case here? Rashi tells us that there are two Yevamos from one brother, and he gave a get to one of them. He was supposed to do chalitza, but he gave a get to her instead. So now he still has to give her chalitza, but now since he gave her the get when he wasn't supposed to, then if he gives that same woman the chalitza, that's not going to be effective to release the other woman, because his connection to her is weaker. And so therefore, if he does chalitza with her, it's not going to exempt the co-wife. So that's what he says. So what's the case here? It says. So he says. So what's the case here? The case. I just lost my place. I'm sorry. Hold on. But if he gives the chalitza to the co-wife under that circumstance, he's going to exempt the one he was going to release the one he already gave the get to, because under those circumstances, the one we gave the chalitza to is the strongest chalitza. So what's his case here? That he gave one woman Maimer. Maimer, we discussed, is the rabbinic kedushin. So he did Maimer with that one woman, and so therefore, what does Rashi say? He says so he does Maimer with one of the wives of the brothers who died, and then afterwards he did chalitza with her. So there he has not exempted the co-wife, because this chalitza is not going to exempt her completely, because she's still going to need a get from the person who gave her Maimer, as we're going to learn in the Mishnah in Perek Rebbe Gamliel, that if you do Maimer, you are also going to need a get. And so therefore this chalitza is going to be weaker. So that's what it says. But if he does chalitza with the co-wife, niftaras balas maimer, that the woman who he gave maimer to is going to be released, and she's no longer going to require chalitza. So the Gemara asks the question: why in the case of these sisters, the low niftarot saros? Why in the case of why in this case, according to Shmuel, that if you do chalitza with the sisters, you're not going to exempt the co-wives, but if you do chalitza to the co-wives, the sisters are going to be exempt. Why? The havya lo achos isha bezika, because it's a weaker chalitza if you do chalitza with the sisters, because the sisters you already have a zika with them, because they're the wife of your sister. They're the wife of a woman who you have the sister of a woman who you have a zika with, so their chalitza is weaker. So therefore they're not going to be exempt to co-wives. But cholas utzaros nami. So therefore, the Gemara asked the question: well, if you do chalitza with the co-wives, it also shouldn't work. It also shouldn't exempt the sisters, the co-wife of each sister, because they're the co-wife of a sister of a woman who you have a zika with, and so it's the same concept. So it shouldn't be strong enough to release them. So the Gemara says no, because Savar Shmuel ain't zika. Shmuel's of the position that there is no zika. So therefore, since there's no zika, the co-wives, it's going to be a very strong chalitza with the co-wives, and therefore it'll exempt the sisters of the women who fall to Yibam with them. The Gemara says, Amar Shmuel yesh zika, but Shmuel says there is zika. The Gemara says no. When he says this position, with Ivrei Omer ain't zika kamer. He says according to the one who says there's no zika, the chalitza with the co-wives will exempt the sisters of the co-wives. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if there's no zika, if he's talking about the one who says there's no zika, well, if he does chalitza with the sisters of the women who fought him with Ibim, amaylo niftaru tzaros. Why aren't their co-wives exempt if there's no zika? So the Gemara says, Bishlam atzar de Rachel loti pater. I understand why the co-wife of Rachel will not become exempt to Kivan the chalitza Leah, because since he first did chalitza with Leah, v'hadar chalitza Rachel, and only then does he do the chalitza with Rachel. Chalitza the Rachel chalitza psula, because after he does chalitza with Rachel after he does chalitza with Leah, he can no longer do yibum with Rachel, because he's already divorced from Leah, her sister, and it's basically it's like the sister of your divorcee. You're not allowed to marry, so the chalitza is much weaker. And let Sarah de Leah tipater. But if he does chalitza with Leah, why isn't the co-wife of Leah exempt? Of course, the co-wife of Leah should be exempt, because as Rashi explains, the chalitza of Leah, it's kashera, because if he wanted to, since when he does chalitza with Leah, if he wanted to, he could have done yibum with her. If we say that there's no zika, Mar says no. My lo niftaru tsaros. What does it mean when it says he is not exempting the co-wives? Nami dika amar atzara de Rachel. It's only talking about the co-wife of Rachel. But tsaros kamar. It says the co-wives in the plural. No, tsaros to alma. No, it means co-wives in general. That if you do chalitza with Rachel, it doesn't release co-wives in general. Iyachi, well, if that's the case, cholatz l'tzaros, nifter. So if that's the case, asks the Gemara, that Shmuel is talking about that if you want to say that Shmuel intends to say that if you do chalitza with the sisters, then you're not going to release the co-wives of Rachel. So too, cholatz l'tzaros. Iyachi cholatz l'tzaros niftaru achayos. So if that's the case, let's look at what the Rashi says. If that which is what you say, that tzaros the Kamar Shmuel, that when Shmuel says that the co-wives are not released, it's talking about the tzara of Rachel, who was the second one who did the chalitza. Chalatz tzara niftaru achros. So why when you do the chalitza, the Rashi says the chicholos with tzaros achos achalutza, when you do the chalitza with the co-wife of Rachel, so to speak, then why is Rachel going to be exempt? Iachi cholatz l'tzaros nifter achios v'atzaros Rachel mi miftera. Is she really going to exempt anybody? She's already exempt from yibum. V'tanan aser adam b'tzaros krovas chalutza. So that a person is not allowed to be with the co-wife of the sister of his achos chalutza. So why is it going to be effective to release if she does the co-wife? If he does chalitza with Rachel's co-wife there, it's also going to be a weaker chalitza. You're not allowed to do yibum with the co-wife of the relative of your chalutza. So the Gemara says no. Shmuel nami hislil v'lo hislil kamar. Shmuel is talking about a case of hislil v'lo hislil, where you began and you didn't begin. What does this mean? Hislil be'achayos that if you start with the sisters, well, yigmor b'tsaros. You're not allowed to conclude with the tsaros. What does that mean? We'll see from the Gemara's case what that means. So that means as follows. Rashi says, "Hischol ba'achayos shecholotz le'leah." That if you did chalitza with Leah, you shouldn't complete it with the co-wives. Meaning to say, the chalitza of Rachel's co-wife will not exempt Rachel. The Tanan, we learned, Asar Adam Betzaras Krovas Chalutza. So a person is not allowed to be with the co-wife, not allowed to do Yibam with the co-wife of the relative of your Chalutza. So Hitchil Betzaras Yigmor Ach Ba'achayos. But if you started with the co-wives, you're allowed to conclude with the sisters. What does Rashi say? The Tanan, Asar Adam, the Kosher came below Yigmor Ba'achayos. The Chalitzas Rachel, the Chalitza with Rachel, is not going to exempt her co-wife because it's not a Chalitza Ma'alya. It's not a good chalitza. So both of them require their own chalitza. That's what it's stating here. But if you started with the co-wives, then you could complete. If you started the chalitza with Leah's co-wife, you could complete it even with the sisters. It's not mutar adam. You can do chalitza even with Rachel. Then, if you did the chalitza started with Leah's co-wife, it's not mutar adam bekrovas tzaras chalitza. So, person is allowed to do yibum or chalitza with the relative of the co-wife of his chalutza. So that's the first answer to how we explain Shmuel. This complicated scenario. Rav Ashi gives a different answer. Rav Ashi, going back to this case of how do we explain Shmuel's position? What did Shmuel say? That Shmuel said one does chalitza with all of them. So what does Rashi say? That really, it's like we said at the beginning, that if you did chalitza with the sisters, then the co-wives are not exempt. But so what are we going to talk about? What was the statement of Shmuel which we had on the bottom of 26b? What was Shmuel's statement? Echad choletz l'kulan. But how can we say that? How can we say Shmuel does chalitza with all of them? But didn't we say that Shmuel says choletz la'achayos lo niftaru tzaros? Didn't we say that Shmuel said that if you did chalitza with the sisters, the co-wives are not exempt? So Rav Ashi explains and so Rav Ashi says no. It's like we said at the beginning that Shmuel's position is that if you do chalitza with the sisters, the co-wives are not exempt, and if you do chalitza with the co-wives, then the sisters will be exempt. And if that's the case, the reason is because with the sisters you can't do yibum because they're the achas ukasa, and the reason why the tsaros are going to release the with their chalitza their sisters, and the reason is in mishum delo alima zika l'shave l'tzara ke'erva. Even though zika, just the fact that you fall to yibum is enough to make the sister of your chalutza prohibited to you, or it's strong enough with the sisters, but it's not as strong enough with their co-wives. That's what the position of Rav Ashi. And indeed, Rav Ashi says, Tanya Kavasi de Rav Ashi, if you do chalitza with the sisters, well, niftaru tsaros, you're not going to exempt the co-wives, and so the co-wives require their own chalitza. Tsaros, but if you do chalitza with the co-wives, niftaru achayos, the sisters are going to be exempt from chalitza. My time, alav mishum dekasavar yesh zika. It must be that we hold that there's a zika. But we don't say that the zika is strong enough to make the co-wife like an erva in that circumstance. And Amar Rav Abba Bar Mama, Beis Shammai, this must be like the position of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai matir not tzaras la'achen. Beis Shammai says that the co-wives are allowed to marry the brother. The co-wife of an erva could do yibam. So because Beis Shammai does not hold by the co-wives, so if that's the case, so then why do you only have to do chalitza with the sisters? You should also do yibam with the co-wife of the sisters. Mara says, no, we're not going to do that because Rabbi Yochanan and Nuri, because we're going to follow the decree that Rabbi Yochanan and Nuri made, the Amar Bo Nesakin Lam with Saros Sheicholtos Lomas Yamos, because Rabbi Yochanan and Nuri said, let's establish for the co-wives that they should do chalitza and not yibam. Meaning to say, even though Beis Shammai says that the co-wives of an erva do not require do not require. You can do yibum with them. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan Nuri said let's require chalitza so we don't make mamzerim. Gemara says, but didn't we say we don't follow that position? Ramar Marlo was speaking with Gemara said davar but didn't we learn that decree was never instituted? Then they did establish it later on. They didn't make that decree. Now the Gemara asked the question on the top of 27b. So let's say, what's the circumstance here? We have Rashi says you have one of the brother dies and he has two wives, and then comes along the surviving brother and he gives a mimer to one, meaning to say like semi-betrothed, or he doesn't do full yibum, and he gives the other one a get, meaning to say, so now he's no longer able to do yibum. Why? Because once you give one a get, the get is not effective. But since he started the process of divorcing her, he can't marry either one. So which one of them should he now do chalitza with and thereby exempt the co-wife? That's the Gemara's question. Everybody's messed up and done things they weren't supposed to here. So the Gemara says, Ezu mehen kodemus. Do we say balas aget adif? For the one who he started giving the divorce to, he should continue. Mishum de ischil ba b'chalitza, because he started with her, so with the divorce process, therefore he should divorce her. Or really ischil ba b'gerushin, the Marshal changes this too. Or perhaps should we say balas maimer adif? No, he should give the one who started to do the yibam with the maimer, he should give her the chalitza, mishum de krov l'bia, because that he has a stronger relationship with her, because he's about to do, he's almost ready to do yibam with her. So Amar Rashi Tashma, Moda Rabbi Gamliel. This refers to a case where we're going to have later on Daf Nun Aleph and Parak Rabbi Gamliel that we're going to have the following case that Rabbi Gamliel says Ein get acher get. Rabbi Gamliel says there that there is no get after a get. What's that circumstance? That Rabbi Gamliel says, but there, even though Rabbi Gamliel says there's no get after a get, he says there is get after a mimer. What's the case? Rashi tells us. Let's say you have two women who fall to yibum from one brother, meaning to say, that there are two women who fall to yibum from one brother, and so he gives the first one mimer, and then the second one he gives a get to. So when he gives the second one a get, then he's disqualified the first one, because once he gives one of the sisters a get, he can no longer continue with the yibum process with the other one. But not only is he not allowed to anyway be with the one who he gave mimer to, because he gave the get to the first one. He's also not allowed to be with any of her relatives, because once you do yibum, once you do chalitza with one, you're prohibited to be with the relatives. And we don't say that since and we don't say, and he's going to be prohibited with both of the relatives. And we don't say that since she was that we don't say that once he did mimer with the first one, it's like she was married, and therefore the get with the second one is completely ineffective. But we say, but now he's not allowed to ever marry any of the one who all the relatives of the one who he gave the get to as well. So that's what Rabbi Gamliel says. Sheyesh get acher mimer, that the get is a powerful, it has legal value, even though he did mimer with the first woman. And the same thing in the reverse, with mimer acher get. I mean, also the mimer does not. It also has effective legal power to prohibit the relatives, even though he gave a get to the first woman. Now, get if we're going to say that a get is stronger than mimer, then mimer after it should not be effective. The mimer and if mimer is a strong principle, then we should say get abasre. Then the get shouldn't work. There must be a lav shmamina ki adadinenu. It must be that they're both equally effective. Shmamina. Okay, so now what's the next case? Amar Rav Huna Marav, so Rav Huna taught an Im Rav. What's his case? Shtei Yevamos, Shtei Achayos, Beis Achayos Yevamos, Shenaful Ufnei Yavam Echad. The two sisters from two different brothers who fell before a third brother. Excuse me. Baruch atah Adonai L'Olam Shakol V'Yisrael. So what's the case here? The case is we have two sisters who are Yevamos, who fell before one Yavam. Cholotz Rishona Hutra. And once he does chalitza with one of them, so Cholotz Rishona, he has released the first one. So let's say Rachel and Leah fell before, let's say, Levi for Yibum. So therefore, once he does chalitza with Rachel, then she's allowed to marry anybody he wants. And Cholotz Lishniya Hutra. And then once he does chalitza with the second woman, she's also allowed to marry whoever she wants from the marketplace. But Mesa Rishona, but let's say Rachel died before she received the chalitza from Levi, Mutar Bishnia. Then Levi would actually be allowed to marry, to do Yibum with Leah, even though Leah was prohibited to him from when she fell to Yibum because she was the sister of her Yevama, her co-Yevama, that is Rachel. Nevertheless, now that Rachel dies, Leah is no longer the sister of her co-Yevama. So Rav says that when you say that the prohibition was just the Zika, this connection, we don't say this concept because she was prohibited him for one moment, she'll remain prohibited him forever. And for sure, Mesa Shnia, for sure, if Leah died, Mutter Berishona. For sure, if Leah died, also we're going to say that Rachel will become permitted. Mishum Nahavi Yevama Shahutra. Because in that case, she was the Yevama who became permitted, meaning to say that Rachel was somebody who was at once permitted when her husband first died, she was permitted to Levi. And then when Leah's husband died, she became prohibited. Vinesra, the Chazra V'Hutra. But now that Leah's died, she again becomes permitted. And so therefore we say, Tachzer Leter Rishona. We say that she comes back to the initial time of being permitted. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, Meisa Shniya Mutter Barishona, that if Leah died under these circumstances, then Levi is allowed to marry Rachel because Rachel was initially permitted because when her husband died, Leah's husband was still alive. Aval Mesa Rishona, but if Rachel dies, then Asur B'Shniya, then Levi is going to be prohibited to be with Leah. Why? My time. Kol Yevama Sheina Nikora B'Bashat Nefila Yevama Yevola, because when Leah fell to Yibum, Rachel was already falling to Yibum with Levi, and so therefore Leah was prohibited at that moment. And so any Yevama about whom you cannot say Yevama Yevola, then she's like the wife of a brother who has children, and such a woman is prohibited in Yibum Asura. So the Gemara says Rav Leisley High Svar, there's Rav who does not agree with Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says that Leah, if Rachel dies first, Leah will always remain prohibited. Does Rav not agree with that? But I'm a Rav, Kol Isha Sheina Nikore B'Bashas Nefila Yevama Yevolea, Alright, he ke'eshes Aksha Ishla Panim Lasur. But doesn't Rav say this explicitly? That a woman who, at the moment of death of her husband, you're not allowed to do Yibam with her. Isn't she like the wife of a brother that who has children? You can't do Yibam. Gemara says, no, Hani Mili Heicha Dekai Ba'apa Isur Achos Isha Diaraisa. That's where it's a biblical prohibition. But in this case, it's not a biblical prohibition. The reason why she can't do Yibam initially is not a biblical prohibition, but only because it's a Zika, because it's this connection that her sister also fell to Yibam. So there's a Zika. So therefore it's D'Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, let's challenge Rabbi Yochanan from our Mishnah, but let's pick this up, God willing. We're going to do the daf this afternoon at 5:35. Note this.